Good morning. If anybody hasn't met me yet, I'm Gordon Boyd. I've worked with Frank a little bit, but he did all the work on this wonderful conference, and it's been a great refreshment and inspiration to hear all the great speakers that we had yesterday and the night before, because it was not only great information, but it was so authoritative and from such a high level of professional experience and viewpoint. It was really great, and hope we can maintain that standard this morning. I started volunteering at Mount McGregor after 9/11. I wanted to try to do something useful with some of my extra time, and I contacted the Episcopal Bishop of Albany, and he put me in touch with Father Karen, who at the time was the Protestant chaplain. And we met, and I began going up there in April 2003. And I did not do any explicitly religious mentoring or counseling up there, but they needed volunteers to help lead transitional services programs. These are curriculums that are developed by the Department of Corrections to be offered at various stages during an inmate's time in prison. There's phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Phase 3 is the courses that an inmate is required to take during about a 6-week period prior to a parole hearing. And so they are courses in money management, decision making, personality adjustment, family life. It's material that is designed to get people's thinking going in relation to what are they going to do on the outside? How do you write a resume? How do you explain the 5 to 13 years of no employment, since your last job? So we read one of my favorites, Who Moved My Cheese, which is about getting ready for change. And so I got involved in those classes. There would be a group of 15 or 20 inmates. There would be an inmate facilitator in addition to myself, just in case I couldn't make it, and also to add their viewpoints in as well. And we would sort of team facilitate and lead a discussion around the issues in the phase 3 curriculum. It was quoted as having said, and did have said many times, that volunteering at McGregor made me feel better about the prospects for the guys that were getting out, because obviously getting out was better than being in. It also, and I'm sure there was a lot of faking to make it going on, but the articulation of the values that are included in these curriculums, I think, were very affirmative. And I know that many of the guys that were involved in these classes took them to heart, took them outside, and found some touchstone from those experiences that would help them on a day-to-day basis. I had a number of interesting experiences along the way. I know every volunteer does, but I remember getting kind of challenged one day on a subject called Joe Harry's window. And this was in a course about how you sort of design your personality matrix. And Joe Harry's window is a grid of 4 squares. Things we know, things we don't know, things that might happen, won't happen. Anyway, there's a square down in the bottom where you don't know what's going to come up. And so the question was, how do you know there's anything really there? And I hadn't really thought about that question, but I said, well, it's kind of like the tree falling in the forest. Does it make a noise? It's a phenomenological question, whether we perceive the things that are happening to us or whether they're actually happening independently of our perceptions. And the inmate facilitator who was sitting in there, congratulated me on that answer. So I thought that was, I must have made some sense, probably more than I'm making this morning. The thing I like about volunteering in the prison, I have a very busy business. I've got a family life. I do other volunteer things in my church and community. But the thing that I appreciate the most about volunteering at the prison is that I don't have to sit on a committee. I don't have a board of directors to answer to. I don't have to raise money. I don't have to do any of that kind of thing that every nonprofit volunteer generally gets bogged down in, and it distracts them from the main reason that they got involved in these activities to begin with. I have to get up from my desk at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, drive about 15 or 20 minutes, check in, go through the machines, get escorted out to the classroom, do what I can for 2 hours to bring some outside insight to the situation, and then I go back, and that's it. So the totality of my commitment is focused on the actual thing that I'm trying to do for the inmates, and also I find great benefit to myself as well. I think that if there was an action item I could recommend for the list this afternoon, it would be to, through whatever networks we have here among the group, is to interest people in doing this kind of volunteer activity in the prisons. I mean, almost every one of the, not all of the high-level legal issues, but a lot of the problems we were talking about yesterday having to do with rehabilitation and life inside the prison and conditions and all that, the more outside people that go in, I think the more accountable the corrections department is to the general public, because the people that go in have their stories, they're able to come out, they're able to communicate with their peer groups outside of prison and their legislators and talk about prison life from a point of view of a taxpayer, of an advocate, of a person who just cares about the course of civilization. So personally, I intend to, after this conference, sit down with people that I know from here in the Episcopal network and see if we can't do something to make a more coordinated approach to the parishes in our diocese and try to interest people around the diocese, which covers a good bit of upstate New York, in establishing a prison ministry. Now, a prison ministry, I don't think has to be a lot of individuals. It might be 1 or 2 people. It might be one person who regularly goes up to the prison to participate in classes and then comes down and has a clothing drive or some other sort of event that can support that activity. But I think that's something that is very compatible with church mission and could be meaningful. I'm also active in the business community where I live. I was on the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce for 8 years, and I think that the business community is another network of people where there are individuals who care about what is happening when people get out of jail. And that may be another place where networking this type of activity could bring more volunteers into the system. And as far as I know, nobody in the corrections department has said, we can't take any more volunteers, okay? So I think that, the door may not be open, but it's unlocked. And we should be able to register volunteers and get more people participating in the programs that are happening anyway. And this doesn't directly solve all of the issues that were discussed yesterday, but it creates a constituency with personal experience and informed viewpoint that can, I think, help build the kind of support politically that is needed to move some of these agenda items along. If we just think of the population in the state prisons, what are we into, like 60,000 something now? and there are so many getting out each year anyway, maybe what, 1,000 plus per year, or just maxing out or being paroled, maybe more. If we had 500 people from faith communities and business communities and nonprofit communities that would agree to be mentors to folks that are getting out of jail. If we had 500, we'd have, everybody could have 2 inmates to look after, and ex-offenders, and be able to connect with them and help them in their adjustment. I've maintained contact with a handful of guys that I've known up at McGregor. I would say my success rate is no better than society at large. My principal success has been here this weekend, Dino. A couple of guys that I stayed in contact with ended up making the U-turn and doing something, kind of poorly planned, shall we say, and are back in. But nevertheless, I think the effort is worth it, even if we are able to get 1 or 2 people better off than they would have been without our involvement. I think it's worth the effort. So, I mean, just if we think about, there is a finite universe of all inmates. There is a finite fraction of that is getting out. There is a number of people that we could say, okay, let's try to build up a network of volunteers that are going to take some responsibility on society's behalf to try to ease the transition to society and make things a little bit better. There's a lot of stuff in the jails, both from the docs curriculum and the sort of the voluntary courses that have been created. And I'm not talking about formal education here that Siena will address, Dr. Richardson and Father Tamburello, but the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, emotional intelligence, the SOAP program. Some of these are motivational in nature, preparatory to getting out. One thing that I think is maybe something that could use a little emphasis in those courses is not letting people's self-confidence get out of control. There's a stage in recovery, I think, where people that are coming out of addiction or alcoholism think they can master the world. And I know guys that have gotten out of jail and they want to turn the world upside down, but in a nice way, and just really do a lot. I think that can lead to overreaching. It can lead to frustration. It can lead to lack of success. And I think it's important to teach people that you need to stay in balance, and it's hard to find your balance when you've been all the way over on the wrong end of things, incarcerated. But as you're coming out, it's important to keep your goals reasonable, keep your capabilities in focus, and not think that you can, conquer the world just because you mastered the correction system. But that's kind of a small point. I think that we have such a high rate of recidivism that it really is something that society at large needs to take responsibility for in an individual way. Each of these people who recidivates is a person who was missing something when they did so. And some kind of individual contact on the outside with people that have gotten out, I think, is a plus factor. Tie that together with volunteer work inside the prison, and I think it's something that no matter what happens with the rest of these agenda items, and we know from an excellent talk yesterday by the former head of the parole board that some of these problems have been around for a while. I had brown hair when he went on the parole board in 1976, and we are now arguably not even as well off as we were then with some of these issues. But individuals can make a difference, and I think that's, I get a lot out of it, and I would hope that we could promote that as an agenda item. So thank you very much.
Good morning. I'm Linda Richardson, the Vice President of Academic Affairs at Siena College. I want to start out first by telling you some particulars about the program, how we started it, and what it is today, which is about 4 years later. And it's some routine stuff, just to give you an idea. I have, I think, a more difficult task in the sense that I do report to a board of trustees, I report to the president, we have a cabinet, I report to the faculty, and I'm responsible for the students, and I'm also responsible for the academic integrity of the program. So if we offer a degree at Mount McGregor, I have to be sure that the faculty who teach in that program are teaching a course that is exactly like the course we would teach at Siena. It has the same academic rigor. I also have to convince members of the Board of Trustees that this is a worthy thing for us to be doing, even though that's within our mission. So I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit about the program, how it started. Then I'll stop if anybody has any questions, and then I'd like to tell you about my experience teaching there and some of the men that I met. Some funny stories, really. It started, Father Matt Conlon, who was a former president of Siena College, who is now deceased, sent me just through the mail, not even through a conversation, sent me through the mail some programs that were going on throughout the state and asked if he thought we could do something similar at Mount McGregor, since we already had some of the friars, not on a formal credit-bearing basis, but some of the friars were already teaching there, ministering there, and so teaching in an informal sense. If we could do something more formal at Siena. And so I kind of put it aside for a while and thought about it, because there were a lot of other things going on. And the more I thought about it, and the fact that we always talk about mission to the students, but we really don't talk about mission and how faculty members are involved in the mission. And our mission as a Franciscan and Catholic institution really is to model the life of St. Francis and to engage ourselves in dialogue with poor and marginalized members of our society. And so, as faculty members, of which I am a faculty member, we go about our day teaching our classes and having our office hours, but we rarely engage ourselves. We engage with the students, but I don't think we engage that much with the mission. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity for the faculty to get out of the ivory tower, use their expertise, which I think is the important point here, and which we try to emphasize with the students, that if you're going to be successful in life, and in all terms of what life is, not just in your particular discipline, your profession, but in your life and giving back to others, which is what we really preach at Siena, you have to really do it through your discipline. So serving in a soup kitchen is great. We all know at Thanksgiving everybody signs up one time for Equinox and goes and serves turkey. But that's a one-day thing, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because we need that. But what we really need is for people to have a sustained effort at that, and to, with that sustained effort, to bring more people into the arena. And so what we're trying to do at Siena, and what we're trying to do with this program, is to get people to see how accounting, chemistry, economics, whatever the topic might be, how you can really give through education in a meaningful way to this population. So after I put it aside and started thinking about this and trying to convince all of those other parties that this was the right thing to do, I said, well, I'm going to go up and meet the men and see what they're interested in. And so I just asked some people whether or not we have any official Mount McGregor people here, and we don't, so I'm just going to be really straightforward about some of this stuff. It wasn't easy. Yeah, it was not easy at all. I mean, in the sense they really want this, but they want it, I think, in name, and as they've promoted this in their literature, but they didn't make it very easy for us to establish a program there. In fact, one thing I do remember was that one of our faculty members, who's been teaching there since the beginning and also taught at another prison, on his ID he had a beard, and one day he shaved his beard off and he went up to teach, and they wouldn't let him in. They sent him home, even though he had all kinds of identifications. So that's just a little minor detail, but It was Dick. Just in case you didn't know who it was. But anyway, so you can see they threw up lots of roadblocks. And the primary, really the major thing was, how are we going to afford this? Because they could not spend any money on this program whatsoever. So this all fell to us. So I didn't know what to expect. You know, I'd watched all those MSNBC lockdown things and thought I'm going to go up there, and I went through the orientation session, and if you've ever gone through the orientation session, you think, you know, my underwire bra is going to be, is going to be taken out and used as a weapon against me. Really? That never happened. Yeah, yet. So, okay, so I went up and I met with a group of men, and they actually were a group of men who already either had a GED or had a high school education, and they were in correspondence courses. And one man came up to me. It was a group of maybe 15 men who were, I guess, representative of the group that would be in our first class. And one man had already had earned over 130 credits for a degree, but it was a correspondence course. And he was taking an independent study as a correspondence course, which is supposed to be face-to-face engagement with a faculty member and something of interest to both the faculty member and the student. And he really wanted to be a professor of economics, and he said, this just isn't working. You know, I don't understand what I'm doing in this independent study. There's no one to call. No one up there has any idea either. So I could see that these men were earning credits, but it's not, you know, it was not the best mode of offering courses. You know, at Siena we have small classes, and the idea is that you really engage with students when you have a smaller class. So I talked to them. They were really excited. They told me the courses they would like, and I said, that's great. I'll have this up and running next semester. I did have good intentions, but of course then we ran into all the technicalities, which probably took us, I think, about another year to get through this before we started offering courses. But the first courses we taught, there were 5 of us, 4 of us who rode up, Father Dennis being one, rode up together on Monday evenings. And I'd have to say, of those courses, and the fact that we rode up together as a group, all teaching different courses and coming back together, I think it was probably the most exciting time we had in our experiences of being talking to one another about who we had met and what had happened in class. But I'll wait and tell you about those stories. So anyway, here are some of the specifics. We can't teach everything up there. So at this point in time, we're trying to get to that point, but because of things like chemistry, if we were going to teach Chemistry 101, we couldn't bring chemicals up there or, you know, any sort of explosive kinds of things. They don't have access to the internet, so it's difficult to teach a computer science course if you don't have a computer or you don't have access to the internet. So we've had to redesign some of the existing courses, assuming just in the old days that we didn't have a computer, but we can't do wet labs. So there's some things we're still trying to work on and being able to offer. Things we've so far been able to teach would be macroeconomics, microeconomics, economic history, religious studies, history, German 1 and German 2. Father Dennis is teaching German 2 to a class that's already had German 1. Sociology, social work. The courses we really need are English and mathematics, but we've not been able to have anybody in those 2 departments volunteer to teach there, although that's really what I think the men need, and really what they want is courses that would be more helpful and remedial as they move on in life. So we went up and we talked with them, and 1 year later we did offer the courses. They're 4-credit courses. They have to take an entrance exam. It's not an SAT exam. However, if they decided to matriculate at Siena, they would have to take an SAT. They can use the credits for transfer credits. They can use them if they decide to go to Siena and they took the SAT exam and met the SAT standard, they could transfer those credits in. They can go do online distance learning. I'm thinking most men have elected through our program to go on to community college, which is less expensive, and there are issues in terms of financial aid depending on the crime that was committed. So There is financial aid available, but it is restricted. Typically, non-matriculated students can only take up to, I think, 3 or 4 courses, and then you have to matriculate. However, I noticed in the handbook, there's a rule that says the VPAA can waive that. So since I'm the VPAA, we have some men who have now taken 33 credits, which is really 11 courses. I mean, they're 1/4 of the way towards an undergraduate degree, which I think is phenomenal. So they take the exam. Not everybody passes the exam. We have a standard. They also write essays, and we try to give them essays that are meaningful to their life. So it's not, you know, those typical SAT kinds of things like the causes and results of World War II or something like that. So it's, I can't remember what I mean, SATs for me were a million years ago. But they're things that we know that they want to talk about. So it's very interesting because you also learn when you read the essays not how well they write, but you also learn a lot about their lives. We waive the tuition, so there's no charge for tuition. And the reason we're able to do that is all the faculty members who teach in the program do so on a volunteer basis. So, and we don't have any overhead costs because we go to the prison, teach the courses, and it's all volunteer. The only thing really that comes out of our pockets would be travel expenses from Siena up to Mount McGregor, which is getting, with the price of gasoline, getting to be somewhat of an worrisome for me in terms of the people that have volunteered to teach. We hope and I should introduce Emily Potka, who is our VISTA volunteer. Emily is going to be responsible. I will listen to her give us her job description today, so now I know what she's doing. She's going to be responsible for trying to transition into other programs, make connections here, as well as building the program so we can offer a full program. Another thing in terms of action items, one thing we really need are books. Because we give, whatever student takes a course, we give them a brand new textbook, at least we try to. We've done fundraising. Some of the faculty members who teach the courses buy the books for the students. We've had some publishers who will give us books, you know, just donate them to us. However, you know, that's kind of running thin because we typically have the same publishers. So an action item for me would be to get some fundraising going, which Emily's going to be responsible for books. So we're trying to build up that library at Mount McGregor. Okay, did anybody have any questions about any of that routine stuff? Okay, so now I want to tell you about the really interesting part, which are some of the experiences we've had with the men. I taught the first time in macroeconomics, and well, first of all, you have to go through all of the hurdles to get into the classroom. And once you get into the classroom, of course, they told us that you can't shake hands with the men, and they call the men inmates, but we decided that wasn't the way we were going to play the game. So what we did was we never called them inmates. We put signs. We gave everybody a sign that said, you know, Mr. Richardson, Mr. Smith, whatever, and we addressed them as such. And that way we would also know the students. So if we called on them, we would be able to call on them by name. And we always came in and we shook hands with them, and the first thing we would have in the classroom, we'd have what we call the ESPN Siena update. So I would go do or whatever that ESPN thing is, and we would tell them what's happening at Siena because we really wanted them to be a part of Siena. We gave them a catalog, we've given them official transcripts, they're supposed to be on the mailing list. So, and actually they saw a lot of Siena news on the news, but we really wanted them to know and feel like they were real Siena students. I never wanted to know why they were incarcerated. It didn't matter to me. They were students just like anybody else, but Fox News ran in the middle of the semester a special on our efforts, and it was advertised as, when the prison doors shut or close, what happens at Mount McGregor? And then the graphic was like blood rolling down the prison part. I'm not kidding. That's the way. I hope you're not from Fox News. But anyway, so I thought, oh, this is terrible. And what they did was they interviewed all the men and asked them what they had done. And I really didn't want, and of course they had to sign a waiver for that. So I learned some things, like we had one man in my class had actually been a pilot and decided he was going to transport things other than luggage. So I did find out, although I didn't want to know. I can remember once we had, it was around Christmas time, and we were having a debate on whether or not you would, if you didn't have food for your family, whether or not it was okay for you to steal in order to feed your family. And I'll never forget, there was a student in the front who was one of those, a typical student who, raises his hand and goes, I know the answer to that. The guy that always sits, or the woman that sits in the front row that knows all the answers and everybody hates them. Well, he's sitting in the front row, and the guy in the back, who didn't ever say a word, but he was, if you remember that movie, The Green Mile, he was very big, very tall, very big. And he had this huge tattoo down his arm that said Murderville, so I thought, whoa. He was a really nice guy, though. But all of a sudden, he hadn't said a word, and he stood up, and boy, he just didn't like this guy in the front who was always, Mr. I know it all guy. And he got up, and they got into this fight about this whole topic. And I was team teaching with Dick Shirey, who's also a faculty member at Siena, and it was an economics class. And I looked around to Dick and I said, do you think we should do anything about this? But it ended up it was fine. It was just an intellectual argument or disagreement, but it was actually kind of neat to see that they really were engaged in moral and ethical issues as well as what we were doing in the classroom. The men, I can't say enough about the men. Everybody says to me, did you have to water down the class? Did you make it easier? Now, I've been teaching since 1974, and wow, and I teach macroeconomics at Siena, so I have students. I have had honor students in macroeconomics, and I don't think they take the work as seriously at the time as the men do. You gave the men an assignment at Mount McGregor, they work on it the entire week, and they also work on it with students in their group. These men found mistakes in our textbooks that we actually had to write to the publisher about. I mean, this is close, fine reading that they do. One thing students at Siena have a difficult time with in economics are graphs. They don't know what the x-axis is or the y or what's on it. They draw a line with nothing on the axis, and then you ask them to explain it, and they're like, well, it's increasing, or it's decreasing. So on our exams, and I gave the same exams to the men that I gave to my students, fabulous graphs. I mean, just absolutely perfect. They would bring in colored pencils and rulers. I mean, and just an understanding, just a very good understanding of macroeconomics. This was during, I think, around 2008. So I brought, especially in economics, you can bring in a lot of material that's relevant to the time. So I brought in a lot of stuff about the budget office, Barack Obama's budget. I tried to bring a lot of stuff in that they could comment on one way or another. It was sort of like point, counterpoint. And they loved that stuff. They ate it up. And if I didn't bring something in, they would find something in the newspaper up at the prison, and they would make copies of it, and we would hand it out in class. They were eager, anxious, respectful, smart, on task. It was just phenomenal. You could tell them to do anything for an assignment. And at Siena, the typical student says, is that going to be on the exam? And, it's like, how many millions of times, or do we have to have that due tomorrow? These men were just phenomenal. I mean, they just so much appreciated the intellectual engagement, and we so much appreciated being there because it was really phenomenal as a faculty member to be engaged with people who really wanted to learn something and wanted you to be there. So that was great. So I guess after we taught that class, I really did miss the guys so much that we decided that we were going to do some, I think, book readings. I think we did Tortilla Curtain. We did one a couple weeks ago, but I think they began calling me the White Oprah because it's like the White Oprah Book Club. But we had the Tortilla Curtain, which we had read in Foundations, and I remember going up there with Dick Shirey. We got in there and we opened it up to everybody. So you didn't have to be a member of this program. You could just be anybody who was interested in reading this book. And obviously we had a lot of people who came, much more than the number of students that we had. And at the beginning of it, they said, we hated this book. Because it's a book, I'm not sure how to... It's a book that we have our first-year students read so that they get an understanding of multiculturalism and they get a sort of a different sense of life as we know it, because our students typically are very sheltered students, and you have to immerse them in a culture other than their own, and that takes some in terms of education as well as experience. But they said, oh, we really hate this. So, but once we got discussing the book and they could see themselves in the book, it's, you know, it's sort of, we gave them questions for discussion, but we tried to draw it out of them. And then what happened was they would be exchanging their experiences, personal experiences, and that started an engagement and conversation that went in a different direction. So once you kind of teased it out of them, they really, you know, hopped on board, and at the end they walked out and said, well, we really didn't like the book, but the discussion was pretty good. So because we miss them, we do this so that we can go up and keep them, so they don't think we're losing them. We want to keep the momentum going. I think that's all I have in terms of experiences, but it was a great experience, and I would encourage anybody. I'm trying to get retired faculty now as volunteers, because I think that would be good for them. They wouldn't have that busy day. So it's great. I love it. Any questions? Nope. Yes. Oh, okay.
Oh, good, good. Yes, I have a question. If you just for a minute take off the Siena College hat and even go back before high school and grade school.
Me? Okay.
Just to correct our system here.
Okay.
What's the youngest age that we can help children instead of when they go, you know, and God forbid they get, you know, they go into jail, they come out, they're just going to be worse. You know, why even put them in jail? How young can we start instead of just educating? You mentioned mentoring too. How young, you know, grade school, kindergarten, pre-kindergarten, can we go in addition to education, try to bring our students in a better direction so they don't even go into jail?
Wow. Well, first of all, let me say in terms of men recidivism, I think the biggest problem from that point forward is, and as it is with addictions, is going back to the same population that brought you into that addiction. So I think all of our efforts sometimes fail simply because if you don't have a support group, which is why I think it's interesting as an action item to get more groups together to make that transition easier, and because, you know, we go home at night and we're not thinking about these people, but they have their friends that they knew before, and they go back sometimes, which I think is a problem. In terms of earliest, I don't know if there's an age that you can put on it, but I think there are things that have to be done in the school systems which have to change. One thing is justice is not blind, nor is education. So if you're in a richer school district, you're going to get a better education, I think, than you will. Like I'm always saying at Siena, why don't we send our teachers into inner city schools? Well, no, they want to teach in Westchester County and they want to teach in Loudonville. Well, it's pretty obvious, I think. So I think that's got to change. I think, you know, I've always thought, I was a Vista volunteer, and I always thought that if everybody had to do some public service, it would be a good idea. I think the more we blend, the more we see situations that people are in, and have some empathy and sympathy and compassion and passion, it will change things. And I don't see the government moving in that direction whatsoever. So I think it's all up to us as individuals, and it's not just through the educational system, it's through society.
It wouldn't hurt to have some teachers that are in grade school or even teaching kindergarten to go beyond educating, end quote, and go into helping students go in a better direction.
Yeah, I think students, as I look at younger students coming, younger students typically are much more colorblind than students of my age. It doesn't, I mean, to them it really doesn't mean much, but what happens is that the experiences you would think going forward would be the same, but they just aren't. So that's what we have to change.
Thank you.
In the education.
I have a partial answer to the last question
Good.
from one of my experiences. I can't remember the general topic of the class, but I think it had to do with family readjustment. And there were about 12 guys in the class. And we'd been through a bunch of topics, and the question of spanking and corporal physical contact as punishment, came up. And the guys had all talked about their family upbringing in a very mixed way. Some had talked about how dysfunctional it was. Parents were drug addicts, no attention, kids on the loose on the street. Others had said, oh yeah, well I had a very strict mother and father, and if I got stepped out of line, they really would take me on. Mm-hmm. And I said, okay, how many, just to sort of get an idea here, how many of the people here, and this was about a dozen inmates, had physical encounters with their parents, where the parents hit them as a form of discipline. And I think 10 out of the 12 hands went up. And I said, well, this isn't to create an ethnic or class differential here, but if you went out to typical kind of middle class Saratoga Springs white ensemble of people, you wouldn't find one family that was hitting their children, okay? And you guys are all in jail, and they're not. So I think, yes, mentoring from an early age is needed, but there is a lot of child rearing styles that are out there that are contributing to violence later in life. And I think we know that a lot of, even if it's not genetically inherited, the behaviors are modeled from parent to child and down through the generations, and I think that's an area that needs a lot of attention.
Let me ask, if we could have the rest of the other two speakers finish before we open it up to questions, just to let them finish, and then we'll open it up.
Oh. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dennis Tamburello. I'm a Franciscan, and I work at Mount McGregor as a chaplain, and also I have taught, as Linda mentioned, I have taught 4 times. I'm actually in my 4th time right now teaching in the program. I taught my Intro to Religious Thought class at Mount McGregor in the first semester, spring 2010, and then again in fall 2011. This summer I ran German 101. I know that must sound odd, but I actually found 15 people who are interested in studying German, something I've always wanted to do, and I got the modern language department's okay. And so I taught 101, and we were all having such a good time, I decided to keep going, and we just started 102 last Thursday. So I'm really happy to be here, and I want to thank Frank and the rest of the organizers of the conference for bringing us all here. I wanted to, as Linda was talking, I recalled a conversation I had many years ago when I was visiting the Albany County Jail. And there was a woman, Dolores Golden, I think was her name, and her daughter actually went to Siena. And she was in charge of services, for the incarcerated. And I went in to see her one day, and there was, outside her window, you could see construction going on for an expansion of the county jail. And she, I noticed this, of course, and she looked at it and she just kind of shook her head and she said, we really should be building schools, not extensions to prisons. And that always stayed with me. But here, several years later, here I am working now in the correctional system. I've been a chaplain officially since October of 2001. I wanted to just give you my own perspective, and I think some of this is colored by the fact that I'm both a chaplain at the facility and I'm also a volunteer. Now, the administration doesn't quite know what to do with that. You know, the administration is, let's put it this way, they are experts at pissing me off. And they do it on a regular basis. So, for example, here I am, I've got an ID, I'm a state employee, and they say, well, you have to apply as a volunteer to teach in a volunteer program, okay? Which I ended up doing it not once, but twice, okay? And they were going to give me even a volunteer identification. That's where I said, you give me that, I'm out of here. No. I'm an employee, I'm not two people. I'm still the same person walking in. I'm always a chaplain, right? Anyway, be that as it may, despite all that stuff, it has been a really magnificent experience for me to teach up at McGregor. And I wanted to just touch on some things, some of which we've heard a little bit already, but just to give you my own perspective on this. One is, I try, when I'm teaching these men, to remember that they are not defined, their whole life is not defined by the thing that got them into prison. You know, I think what often happens is they're treated more or less in terms of their crime by other people at the prison, even well-meaning people. Okay? And I always try to say, no, you know, this is not who you are. I don't think of you as a convict or as a criminal. You are a student. And I think it's really important to see that, you know, and sometimes people will complain, they'll say, you know, why are we offering, you know, why are we giving these people a free education? You know, when that Fox News story came out, it was posted on the web and there were comments, you know, of course everybody has an opinion, and, you know, well, I won't tell you what I think about that sometimes, but anyway, people were looking at this story that was done, which was actually, I was a little bit concerned because I'm not a big fan of Fox News myself. But they did a very good, positive story about our program up there. But then somebody wrote in and they say, you know, why should we be giving a free education to these convicts? You know, why should we be giving them anything? And my answer to that is, well, first of all, we're not giving them a completely free education. We're giving them a couple of free courses which they can apply to. I mean, sooner or later, they're going to have to matriculate somewhere if they want to do something with these credits, as Linda said. But the other thing that my response would be, you know, some of these guys, in fact, many of them, have never gotten a break in their entire lives. No one has ever cut them a break. No one has ever given them a chance. And to me, when you do that, you can see what great things happen. And I'll tell you, when I look at these guys, like Linda said, they work so hard. Sometimes they'll spend hours, like, you know, the German class. I don't know, does anybody know German in here? You know, it's not an easy language. You know, there's about 20 things that can go wrong in any German sentence. It's a hard language, and they just started a study group. They're going to get together and study together. You know, they are so motivated. If I ask them to do a homework assignment, as I say, it's right there, okay? One of the things that I noticed when I was teaching my religious studies class, at the end of the 3 hours, because I have to teach it in like one big 3-hour segment, so it would be once a week for 3 hours. So it really covers what would normally be spread out over 2 or 3 classes, all in one class. One of the things I noticed, like, you know, at the end of a 55-minute, now a 60-minute class starting this September, at the end of a 55-minute class or even an hour and 20-minute class at Siena, They're ready, on your mark, get set. They're ready to run out the door. 2 minutes before the period ends, they're closing their books and, everything else. These guys, at the end of 3 hours, they're raring to go. There was one time I needed to make up some time, and I was going to be at the facility a little bit later, and I said, guys, would anybody be interested maybe to catch up a little bit in going an extra hour? Not a single one of them said no. 4 hours they sat with me, and they would have sat for a fifth. The level of motivation is absolutely staggering to me. The other thing that is staggering to me is, well, let's face it, these guys didn't get into prison by being intensely interested in school, right? In fact, many of them, they'll tell you, right, they'll say, I never was interested in school. I was a dropout, or I went, but I didn't really work very hard. I didn't really give a crap about school. And so what often these guys missed in their lives, they missed how intellectually gifted they are. They never knew they had this intelligence. They start studying in these programs, and then some of these guys have had, not the best educational background either. It's amazing how much motivation will compensate for a lack of background. They start studying this stuff, and they find that they have gifts, intellectual gifts, that they never knew they had. And it's astounding to see. And what I see them walking around with their books and their notebooks and everything else, and I see a different person than I saw before. It's like they have a new sense of themselves. They have a new sense of their own identity. And I think there's nothing that pleases me and that lifts me up more than that. To see these guys who couldn't even say a good word about themselves in some cases, all of a sudden having a new sense of self-identity and something about themselves that they could be proud of. I don't know, I can't say enough how important that is. One thing I wanted to, just a couple other things I wanted to mention. The logistics of teaching in this kind of a program, aside from, some of the rigmarole that you have to go through. I don't usually have to go through security because I am an employee, at least they spare me that. Okay? They'll let me walk in without going through the machines. Okay? But you do have to kind of go back to the old-fashioned mode of teaching. Like, I never thought I'd ever use an overhead projector again. But they have overhead projectors in some of these classrooms, and I find myself using them. I went into the School of Liberal Arts office a couple months ago, and I said, I kind of was by any chance, I said, do you have some transparencies? And they said, we have a whole box of them that have been just sitting here for years. You want them? They gave me the whole box. But I take my PowerPoints and I put them on overheads. You make it work. Now, some classes, like Linda said, some classes it's really hard. We probably couldn't teach a lab science. I don't. That would be probably virtually impossible to teach a lab science. But there are other things that can. The other thing I just want to mention too is, again, the fact that this is a low-budget operation, where the faculty sometimes have to go begging for books, and hopefully Emily's going to help us with that a little bit. But, when I wanted to teach the German class, at first I got stymied because a brand-new modern language textbook usually runs about $150 to $200. I don't know if you're aware of this. It's outrageous. It's obscene, okay? So what I did was I went back 2 editions. And then on Amazon.com, the edition that's 2 back from the current one, I could get for like $5. With shipping, it was $10. I wrote to my friend in the development office, and I said, do you think you can find me a couple $100 for books? He said, I'll bring the money in on Monday. I said, whoa, whoa, I don't want you to pay. He said, I want to do this. He said, I don't have a lot of money to throw around. This is a cause I really believe in. I had the guys write him a note that they all signed a card, a personal message to him. He said he cried when he read the card. And I wrote to him the other day and I said, Jack, I just wanted you to know, I decided to teach the second half of this. I don't need any more money. I said, the books that you bought are good for at least a year. I said, I just wanted you to know that the guys wanted to thank you again for the books because now it's taken them through the second half of this. So it's really great. Now I'm going to say one last thing. And I think I need to mention this because it's been one of the things that's pissed me off. And I might get myself in trouble for saying this, but you know, recently there was something that developed in the McGregor program. Linda, you'll probably kill me for saying it. That some of the guys who had been in the program were removed from it because of the nature of their crime. Now, they had been allowed into the program. Some of them took several courses with us, and then they were evicted from the program. Now, I don't know why this happened. I didn't really feel that I got an adequate answer from the administration. I'm not done with this yet. It might end up costing me my job, but Linda and I intend to meet with the superintendent to talk about this issue. We were going to do it, but then a couple things got in the way in both of our lives. But you know, that really bothered me. And some of these guys, one of them in particular, was absolutely crushed that he had to leave this program. And I think the reason, this is my guess, my educated guess, is that somebody complained to the administration saying, you know, how can you let a sex offender, you know, into one of these courses? And so the powers that be decided, no, okay, anybody with certain kinds of crime, and I think it was sex offenses were singled out, who's in the program is out now. And like, we never set that kind of a restriction. We have, as I say, we have an entrance exam, or we have a requirement for, you know, if you have a certain number of credits that you've completed successfully, we allow you into the program without the entrance exam. Of course, you have to have at least a GED. But we never set any other kinds of restrictions, other than that the fact that the person has to be on good behavior, of course. We understand that. But we never said, you know, we don't want people who've committed a certain crime in our classrooms. Because, again, I don't want to think of my students that way. So this is something that, to put it perfectly plainly, goes up my ass a mile. It really, really bothers me. And yet, I love teaching in this program. I think it's been a positive thing. I think I've gotten more out of it than I put into it. And I want to thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Hello, good morning, everyone. That's a hard act to follow. Because you can get away with a lot when you're wearing that kind of, you know, you could say, you could swear, you get to be pissed off. It's,
what has Brown done for you lately?
So my name's David Karp. I'm a professor at Skidmore College and a volunteer at Mount McGregor. And I want to be brief because I have the next session where I can be long-winded. So it's unfair to say a lot. But I think I was asked to be on this panel because I am involved in the educational component of this larger system, as well as in the mentoring component of being a volunteer. So I'll just mention briefly what I do that's just slightly different from the other kinds of volunteering that we just heard about. To start with, I want to say that in my head, when I think about guys in prison, and I think about the men mostly, there are women in prison, of course, but I think about the men because that's where I volunteer at a men's facility, and also because 90-something% of all inmates are male, and we don't often talk about that, and that's something that's a theme I want to get back to, the fact that if we're going to address the crime problem, we have to address the manhood problem or the masculinity problem. We don't often talk about that when we talk about the causes of crime and the injustices and so forth. What is it about our definition of manhood that causes so many men to get involved in criminal activity? So anyway, I think about the guys inside, and for me, there's 4 basic things that are needed for success, and they're pretty basic. One is, of course, a place to live when you get out, and a job so you can make money, and then the other 2 are having a personal sense of direction, and then the 4th is having a circle of support. And I think that the kind of volunteer work that I've gotten involved in tries to speak to those 4 categories. And the first set has to do with the practical, the where to live and getting a job problem. And what we have been doing at Skidmore is recruiting students to be involved as volunteers. And so this is a little bit of a twist on the Siena program where they've recruited faculty to be involved. And I think we have underestimated and undervalued the role of college students as volunteers in facilities. First of all, they love the opportunity. I have long waiting lists of students who want to help out, and the constraint is actually the facility itself, which can't really handle the number of students that would like to come. So I have a small group of students that want to be involved. They want to be involved. That doesn't mean that they're not anxious about being involved, and certainly they're very nervous about going into the facility and volunteering. And that comes from the obvious reasons, like like what's going to happen to me in the orientation program that suggests that everybody on the inside is going to somehow take advantage or manipulate or get these college students in trouble in some way. But also, college students in the ones I teach are a traditional age population. They're 18 to 22. They are young, and they say to me routinely, we're going to go in and talk about finding housing and getting jobs, and I've only lived with my parents. I've never signed a lease, and I've never had a job except working selling ice cream cones one summer. So they feel very anxious about this idea that they're supposed to be experts about this. And so the first thing that we realize is that they don't have to be experts in those particulars. They have one thing that they have profound expertise in, which is the internet. And as we've heard, the inside men don't have access to computers or the internet, which means that their access to up-to-date information is so constricted that they rely on programming offered by the Department of Corrections that is not very rich in contemporary detail. So the students can go out and they can gather information, and then they offer workshops that feel very practically useful, like lists of places where you can seek out housing, what the rules are with New York City public housing, where you can go to look up jobs, how exactly you would make use of the internet when you get out. Like, go to a public library, sit down at the system, click on this link, go to this list, search here, do this, so that there is a sense of confidence. Okay, I know exactly what I need to do when I get out. We also engage in ethical dilemmas or debates that we don't have answers to. And in fact, as far as I can tell, nobody does. The biggest one being, what do I write about this little gap in employment that I've had for 5 or 18 years when the employer is asking me, like, what have you been doing for the last while? And so that's a very hard question to answer. I don't think there is a good answer to it. We talk about whether you should put it right up front and in the cover letter, or you should say, as some recommend, I will explain at the interview, so that you can get past the first hurdle in the application process. So these are not things that we claim to be experts in our volunteering, but we're experts in finding the information, identifying the debates, raising the question, sharing what different people's answers to that question is, and leaving it to the men to decide for themselves what to do. We make resumes. We look at the resumes. We talk about how to put your best foot forward in an interview. We had a great time doing a role play where one of the students was role playing being in a job interview, and he intentionally did some things well and some things badly. And then the guys in the program were able to highlight what they thought was successful and unsuccessful and practice themselves. So the students as volunteers have served in this very powerful, very practical role of providing up-to-date information about opportunities on the outside, and can answer questions. Someone will say, yeah, but what about Rochester? I need to know something about housing in Rochester. And 2 weeks later, we'll have that answer for that person that's specific. So I think that's great. The second thing that I do pertains to the second two categories of need around a sense of direction and a circle of support. What I have discovered at Mount McGregor is that there are many inside men who are very talented facilitators, very wise elders in the system who run their own programs, and they don't. I'm not necessarily needed for that. However, I've been involved in a project that is called the Men's Leadership Circle. And really what that is a support circle for inmates who are running their own inmate-led programs. And these are often men who every week when we see them will say, they'll say, oh my God, I've had such a busy week. I have had no time for myself. I haven't even been able to get to the gym. I mean, they're the most workaholic, overworked, busy people I've ever met, in contradiction to the standard assumption that these guys have all the time in the world. They're so busy with programs. So we have a program of volunteers who offer these guys support, and it's essentially guidance and support around how to be a good facilitator and how to run a good program. And most of that is organized around issues of social support, of helping the inside men develop a sense of self, a sense of purpose, a sense of direction, a sense of connection to the outside world. And there's a series of volunteers a set of volunteers that come regularly. This is connected to a larger organization. It's a volunteer organization for men. It's called the Mankind Project, and it's online if people are interested. The Mankind Project is all over the country, and there are some spin-off projects in California and in Massachusetts, specifically working with in prisons. The California project is called the Inside Circle, and that one is online. And the Massachusetts project is called the Jericho Circle, and it's also online. So there are many resources for volunteers who are interested in working with men on the inside, and even offering support groups as they transition out. So that, everything else I would have said in a short commentary would just echo what the others have said in terms of the incredibly satisfying experience, the fact that we get as volunteers as much out of it as the other participants do in the program, and the sense that the inside men that I've worked with are incredibly hungry. That same sense of motivation that they are so appreciative and grateful for the work that just makes it all the more worthwhile. So it's only with appreciation that I participate in these programs.